I'm Dave Madsen. Welcome to our Facebook Live coverage of the primary, September 6th primary here in Massachusetts. I'm joined by a political consultant, Paul Robbins of Paul Robbins Associates. Paul, we know that Maura Healey has won as we expected. We expect her to go on shortly. But, of course, a huge portion of the vote. Interesting, though, that Sonia Chang Diaz picked up 15% and she had dropped out of the race. But there's always that, right?
Yeah.
In any election.
Yeah, I think the thing was, folks looking at this race looked like it was an open seat. Open seat always brings a lot of people.
Yeah.
Interest. Talked about it before. Hugely expensive to run. You got to spend $10, $12, $15 million. At some point, you just run out of gas. If you don't have high name recognition, which she did, she was also a constitutional state office holder. So no surprise there.
Gas and cash.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. Locally, we do have a race that has been decided in the 8th Hampton District. Shirley Arriaga beating Joel McAuliffe to win the seat to replace Joe Wagner. But we talked about this in our last hit that initially it looked like McAuliffe would be the winner of this thing, but she worked her tail off.
I'll tell you what, 2 words I'm going to start with. Joe Wagner. It's his
endorsement.
Seat. Listen, that guy has carried a lot of water for a long time for the whole region and in Chicopee. He's well loved in Chicopee, and his endorsement, there were a lot of endorsements on the other side. His endorsement, Richie Koss, the former mayor, Dolly Aslin, former city collector. Those 3, I think I was telling someone the other day, if you had to get 3 endorsements in Chicopee for a race, those would be the 3. But yeah. Joe Wagner.
3 wise men and 1 woman, 2 wise men and 1 wise woman. Interesting with that. And I mean, it'll be interesting to see now, based on that, Joe's endorsement. Of course, you look at the clout that he carries in the city of Chicopee. You kind of wonder, well, will that have that same kind of impact in the other races? Because really, like the race for governor's council here, it was like, oh, who endorsed who?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing about the Arriaga race is you had Joe Wagner, right? But you had a single mom, brought up by a single mom, veteran of the United States Air Force, an educator, and got a degree in law. I mean, that's a pretty impressive background. So he had both, but Joe Wagner.
The other thing you and I were talking about in between our 2 hits here on Facebook is the changing face of the legislative delegation here in Western Mass over the last 8 years. Not almost a complete turnover. I mean, there's still some of the veterans who are in there, but some of the longtime reps, Joe Wagner dropping out now, and Tom Petrolotti,
another good one.
Folks like that. Angelo Pupil, I think now is the dean of the Western Mass delegation. He is. I said when I had him on here, I said, "Do you realize now you'll be the dean of the delegation?"
Hey, I'm old enough to remember when the Senate Majority Leader was Linda Melkonian, who had been a client of mine. And Brian Lees, who had also been a client of mine, a minority leader. That I don't know if that ever happened before in Springfield. Both splitting Springfield, both bringing home the bacon. We've lost a lot over the last couple of years. Petrolotti leaving, and now Joe Wagner leaving. That leaves a void. But on the other hand, you have someone like Arriaga who's going to get the support of a Joe Wagner. So look for her to maybe rise in leadership over the next 2 or 3 or 4 terms.
She goes in with some clout. You think back to, you talk about that, to Brian and Linda, but, back to the late 60s and early 70s when you had Mossy Donahue as Senate President and David Bartley as Speaker of the House. Same sort of thing.
Same thing, but even more at that point. Yeah, we've lost a lot of clout. We'd only have about 10 or 12% of the vote out here. So we have a candidate, Eric Lesser, trying to break through. That's really hard to do.
Yeah.
We talked about it earlier. He has $1 million. A lot of that's going to go to name recognition. But yeah, I think it's, these things come in cycles, but we're in the down cycle now, and let's hope these new fresh faces will find their way into leadership.
Well, it would be interesting, too, when Angelo was on my Sunday program, and we talked about, because I think Angelo was long considered the front runner for that Senate seat, the lesser Senate seat, and he opted no. He says, you know what, I'm happy doing what I'm doing. And I mean, if you look at it, too, he probably would have won the nomination.
No doubt, no doubt. He had high name recognition. He had a lot of resources. Could have raised even more money. He was well known. But I talked to him about the time, and he said, look, I'm going down to Boston every day, or COVID, we weren't going every day. But what's the difference?
Yeah.
Right? What's the difference? A larger district you have to, become aware of. It's more complicated, and really it's the same work.
He felt he could get more done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And he's further along in terms of leadership than he would be in the Senate. So, I mean, he's got a, young family. The girls are going to high school and college. So, that factors in
Dad
nowadays.
wants to be around. I don't blame him at all. What are you hearing on the Hampden, Hampshire, Worcester district, Levin Epstein and Oliveira?
What I heard recently is that Oliveira is ahead, but I'm not sure if the whole district is in yet.
Okay, yeah, because the polls have been closed for about an hour.
Yep. So we should be getting something fairly.
We
soon.
do know that the only problem, I guess, in voting today was they couldn't open the vaults in Barnstable, so that the judges ordered them in Barnstable, the town of Barnstable, to keep the polls open until 11 o'clock
I read that,
tonight.
yeah.
So
because it couldn't. Yeah, it was.
Or
the
midnight.
handle fell off.
The
or
handle,
something.
yeah. So I mean, well, and that's you look at that, and I mean that area has always been fairly Republican. It's probably split down the middle with independents, but I remember in years past it was always a Republican. You wonder if that could have an impact on the Republican governor's race.
Good point. If there's a turnout there and they lean one particular way, and there's not going to be a ton of votes, there's not a lot of Republicans, it's going to be a small amount. Upsets can happen when there's small turnouts. You get up to 20% or more, generally it's a reflection more or less of whatever any polling tells you. You get under that number, 15 down to 15 or 10%. And so I don't know what the turnout's going to look like on the Republican side. There's not a lot of energy because most of the constitutional office holders who are running for lieutenant governor have no shot.
Right.
So the governor maybe, but maybe if it's Doughty, because I don't see a Trump Republican winning in Massachusetts. So, but they're on fire, the Trump supporters. So maybe they will create a turnout. But you're right. Yeah, stranger things have happened.
Yeah, we look ahead to November and the Trump influence. And I mean, there are times, and I've had political discussions with friends, we talk about this, wondering if because Massachusetts is so heavily Democratic that we're kind of in a vacuum here and sometimes don't see what's going on in the rest of the country. What are you hearing around the country as far as the mood of the country? Because Donald Trump, again, we see him out speaking and he's still talking about 2020, and some of his candidates are winning, some of his candidates aren't. But yeah, you look at Wyoming. I mean, Liz Cheney, of course, taking her stand against him
and losing by 30 points,
and losing and knowing she was going to lose. I mean, I look at her and I say, you talk about political courage. There are very few people who would do what she did.
Yeah.
But what are you hearing around the country?
One of the biggest kind of factors in any election is this phrase: "Are things getting better or worse?" Is the country going in the right or wrong direction? Right or wrong direction is a predictor, really, of most presidential elections. Prior to Trump losing the presidency, wrong direction. And more people were saying wrong direction. They're saying wrong direction now. So could we be in a cycle of one-term presidents? I think there's a lot of time between now and 2 years from now. I do think the country took a collective deep breath after the Trump loss. Of course, it's being regurgitated now because of January 6th and the classified materials. But I think basically people are not happy in either party for different reasons. Joe Biden won because he was a safe place to go. I said to somebody, I think it was Bloomberg had called me, when was a turning point for Joe Biden? And I said it was in Massachusetts. He won a Democratic primary, not spending a nickel or day in Massachusetts. You had a sitting U.S. Senator, Elizabeth Warren, on the ballot. And Bernie Sanders,
Vermont,
beloved in Massachusetts, she finished third, he finished second, and Biden won going away. So I think that could happen again. But right now we're in this transitional phase. It's social media has fed it, the 24-hour news cycle, the evening news shows where the talking heads go. So I do think if we checked the record, I think fewer people probably right now are watching the cable news shows as it's taking a deeper breath. They did notice right before the election was very high because people were rooting for, either change or they wanted a second term for Trump. So I think wrong direction, but that could change in 2 years.
What's the hold that Donald Trump has on the Republican Party? It seems in the leadership, the higher-ups in the Republican Party, there's this fear of going against him.
It's 2 words, the base.
The base, yeah. And his base is loyal and strong, isn't it?
It is. Where it hurts them is in the Senate.
Yeah.
Because you have to go to a general election. Where it helps them is in the House. So through gerrymandering, So you used to have districts that kind of looked like this, and there were Democrats and Republicans in it. Now it's like, oh, all the Republicans or all the Democrats are in this horseshoe shape. And both parties have done it.
Yeah.
Both have done it. So now you have primaries that you have to be extremely progressive or extremely, in this case, Trumper, in order to win the primary. So that's the hold that he has on folks. That doesn't play as well in a general election. So I think they're going to lose a governorship. You know, they have a governor's race in Pennsylvania. I think they're going to lose that. I think Dr. Oz loses that race in, I think, Wisconsin. Maybe they lose that race. So it helps them with the, it's every time he says something outrageous in Florida, tens of millions of dollars come in online. And when Trump started to stop the steal political action.
Interesting to watch DeSantis. I've got a lot of friends who are still in Florida, and that he's running for re-election this year. But it doesn't seem like he's running for governor. He's running for president. That everything he does doesn't seem to carry the weight it would carry in Florida, but nationwide it might. Is he Trump's biggest foe if Trump decides to run?
For sure.
Yeah.
They're relitigating. Trump's going to be, barnacled with all these legal challenges.
There's a lot to that.
There's a lot to that. Yeah. And so he still commands the Republican primary, but I really think if he gets really weighed down by all this stuff, and let's say a bunch of people get in, okay, the Trump set, and you had a fractured field, and he said the most outrageous things that galvanized people. So, yeah, I think what DeSantis do something incredibly stupid not to win. And so he's still running, and his base will come out. The other thing that happens with the base, they're fired up, they get out and vote. Michigan, Wisconsin, way overperformed.
Right. As you look at Trump, do you think, or do you hear from within the Republican Party? Yeah.
He performed a duty or function for them, getting the judges that they wanted, the tax break, the big tax break that they passed. I think they'd rather see him go, but keep his base.
All right, Paul, we're going to stop here. Paul and I coming in. And, of course, you can always get the latest results on the Western Mass News app or at westernmassnews.com. For Paul Robbins.